Let's go ahead and stand up together as we worship our God. It's incredible that we have this opportunity to approach Him. Let's do that together.
We make way for you, prepare a place for you. Let our praise become your throne, and hear your people sing and give you everything. Jesus, all for you alone. Oh, hail the King, oh, hail the Savior, Jesus, the Son of God. Oh, hail His name, oh, hail His power. Before His feet we fall as we crown Him Lord of all. This is royalty, robed in majesty. All the earth will stand in awe, and for eternity all of heaven sings with an everlasting song. Oh, hail the King, oh, hail the Savior, Jesus, the Son of God. Oh, hail His name, oh, hail His power. Before His feet we fall as we crown Him Lord of all. We crown Him Lord of all. Awake my soul and sing of Him who died for me, and hail Him as the matchless King through all eternity.
Sing that again. Awake my soul.
Awake my soul and sing of Him who died for me, and hail Him as the matchless King through all eternity. Sing all hail. Oh, hail the King, oh, hail the Savior, Jesus, the Son of God. Oh, hail His name, oh, hail His power. Before His feet we fall. Oh, hail the King, oh, hail the Savior, Jesus, the Son of God. Oh, hail His name, oh, hail His power. Before His feet we fall as we crown Him Lord of all. Crown Him Lord of all. Let's give Him praise this morning. Amen. You guys can go and have a seat.
Amid life's chaos and commotion, it's easy to lose sight of God's holy grandeur that surrounds us. The marvelous splendor of God's glory can help silence the noise, and in our awe and wonder, leave us
Hi, everybody. It's great to have you with us this morning. I want to say hi to everybody who's joined us in our online environments. Each week, I'm just so blown away from what we hear from people who are joining us online. Hundreds and hundreds of people each week are a part of our church, but have still never set foot in this building. We are so thankful for you. Glad you are here with us. And listen, we have like this small army of people that helps to create the digital content, to make sure it's online, on time, to make it look good. Staff members, volunteers, people in chat rooms, trying to connect people in digital platforms. Man, it's amazing. I always say this, like, we live in the future. We're connected with people all over the country, even all over the world through these digital platforms. Man, that's an incredible opportunity that we have. I'm just so thankful. A buddy of mine texted me, is like, hey, I'm driving today. We're going to tune into the live stream on the way home in the truck. It's like, man, you just turned that into a mobile church. I love this stuff. And so thankful to be with you guys. And man, as cool as it is, it's totally cool. I mean, I could pull up on my phone at the touch of a button some of the best preachers and teachers in the world. There's some really incredible content out there. And I can, at the push of a button, dial into some of the greatest worship music I think the world has ever seen. Without question, some of the best. But do you know what we cannot reproduce in the digital environment? It's this right here. It's when we get together in person and when we center around the gospel as a people in a place at a time. There's nothing like it this side of heaven. I get so amped up when I start to talk about it because it's really special. If COVID taught me anything, is that how special our gatherings are to center around the gospel, to unite our voices in prayer. Man, that's amazing. To get a chance to offer up a song, a sacrifice of praise to God, to give back even just a part of what He's given to us. Man, that's truly remarkable. So I'm just so thankful to have you guys with us here today. We're kicking off a new teaching series called Speechless. And this series was actually created in part by my 8-year-old son, Maddox, because about a year ago, we were out, we're just walking to the mailbox, and on the way back, he said the most random thing to me, which is not uncommon for kids. But he said, "Dad, does God ever make you speechless?" Now, if you were in my family, you would probably think what I was thinking was like, "Dad, does God ever shut you up because you talk a lot?" You know, like, that's kind of the moment I was having. And so I leaned in a little bit. I was like, "What are you talking about, buddy?" And then he says this, "Isn't He so amazing that it like makes you not know what to say?" And I said, "Oh, hold on a second." I got on my phone. I literally wrote down what I'll be with you in a second. I wrote down what he said, and then it was like, yeah, man, totally. You know what we're going to do? I've been telling him for a year. We're going to have a teaching series called Speechless, and I'm going to give you all the credit for it because this brilliant moment. And what my 8-year-old son brought me into it was beautiful. I love those moments. It launched a great conversation, but it was super convicting too. Because it was like I was being reminded of how big, how amazing, and how great God is, and how little I pay attention to that. You know, like, think about your past week. Has there been a single moment in our past week where we were just floored by the grandeur of who God is? Now, like, we get these glimpses, right? We have these moments. Like, I think we all have these moments in our life where we stumble into some of that majestic nature, that brilliance of God. Like, for me, like, you put me on top of a mountain, looking out over the landscape, that alone, it'll leave me breathless. It'll launch me into these thoughts of how big God is and just how small I am. You put me on a beach overlooking the ocean, guaranteed I'm going to sit there and go, "No way," you know, for at least 10 seconds, you know, and then I'm like, "Stop doing that. Get over here." You know, I got 3 kids. I'm always trying to keep people alive, you know. It's like, it's my basic function on this planet. Yeah, I remember when my kids were born, man, that left me totally speechless. That this this baby was inside there and now is like here? Like, what? I mean, that's unbelievable. And so as we begin this teaching series, I want to challenge all of us. Think about those moments in your life when you were breathless. You were left speechless. What was that moment? Was it on a mountain? Was it a beach? Was it a baby being born? I mean, sometimes I'll just look at the colors in a sunset, and it just stops me in my tracks. For like 5 seconds, I'm like, wow, that's really beautiful. You know, get out of my way. Stop texting and driving, you know. And I want to really, you know, as we start talking about this idea of speechless, which is really going to be a study of God's holiness, I really want to challenge all of us. What is it about those moments that leave us speechless? Well, like if we had to label what it was about those mountaintops, oceans, sunsets, babies, what is it about those moments that reverberate deep within our souls that give us a pause? What is that? I mean, are you like me in that moment and you feel like you're stepping into something really profound, but it's pretty fleeting, and then you kind of step back from it? What is it about those moments? I'm just going to give you my own sort of answer to this question is anytime I feel really, really small, I step into that place. Anytime I see an image come from the Hubble Space Telescope, I always think, we are floating on a giant rock around a burning star in an expanding. Does that melt anybody else's brain? Just to think of that for a second. For me, it's that smallness, that moment when I get to step outside of the noise of what's going on in my daily life. I'm so thankful for our team that put together that graphics package, because they just brought us right into this idea that we get so consumed with the noise and the stuff and the days and the schedules, we can miss the grandeur that's all around us. So this series that we're stepping into today, called Speechless, is all centered around the holiness of God. And the best way to start talking about the holiness of God is to stop and consider those moments that have taken our breath away, and to think, oh, we're going to study that. We're going to step into that. And the purpose, the goal behind this series is pretty simple. It's just to recenter us back to who He is and to be in awe of Him. 4-part series. The only purpose is to give us a bigger view of who God is, and to do that, we're going to study holiness. And actually, this series is designed to prepare us for Easter. And I want to show you this. So this series we started putting it together a year ago. I'm thankful to my son for that. And it's taken us a long time to sort of think about where this fits and how do you talk about these really big concepts. And so how do you boil it down into 30-minute chunks over the course of 4 weeks? And so, as we talk about getting ready for Easter, this idea of holiness is actually a part of a larger teaching theme. So a few months ago, we started talking about how we need to redefine what sin is in our life. And that when we see the grotesque nature of our sin, that just puts a spotlight on the beauty of the gospel. In the moment we see our sin and what God has done to redeem us and forgive us from that sin, man, that just puts all the emphasis on Jesus. And so we talked about how do we redefine what it means to connect to Jesus and to be a follower of Jesus, because there's a lot of weird ideas out there about what it means to be a Christian and a follower of Jesus. And so we just let the text shape us and mold us into what that looks like. But this series was really just setting us up for the series we just came out of, which was called Unexpected Invitation, because to think that the God of the universe invites us very unexpectedly into a close proximity to Him is absolutely unbelievable. Truly, if He didn't do it, I wouldn't believe it was possible. But that was just really setting us up for this series, which is Speechless, because we're being invited to get into very close proximity to a very holy God. How do unholy people approach a holy God? We're going to talk about it through this series, but that's just paving the way for what comes next as we see the holiness of God put on a human trial. And we're going to look at the trials of Jesus leading up to His death and His resurrection. This is going to prepare us for what comes next, which is Easter. So this is really one of a 5-part teaching that's spanning since January all the way up into April. And the reason why I'm telling you all this is because once we get to this teaching, we're really talking about the unexplainable components of who God is. And in Christian world and churches throughout history have tried desperately to bring God down to a human level, to somehow rationalize the unimaginable components of who God is and put it into very tangible things that we love to put in 3-ring binders with color-coded tabs and workbooks and fill in the blanks, and we've got this whole God thing figured out. Okay, remember who we're talking about. Christianity 101 has as its basic, most fundamental premise a God who exists outside of our ability to comprehend. That he is so different, so transcendent, that we wouldn't know anything about him except what he has revealed to us because he loves us. That's the starting point. Outside of our understanding of time and space is the abode of the divine. Okay, what? We're going to try to talk about that for a little while throughout this series, and it should be a lot of fun. Hopefully it leaves us speechless to consider even for a moment the splendor and the majesty of the God that invites us to know him. So how on earth would we even begin to talk about this idea of speechless? Well, if we want to define biblical terms, where would we go to do that? We go to the Bible, yes. Kindergarten questions get kindergarten answers. You know what I'm saying? It's pretty simple. But these ideas are super, super big. And we're going to do our very best to unpack them through the lens of the vantage point of God himself. So when God starts talking about his character, his nature, and his holiness, how does he do it? We got a ton to learn from this. And so come with me in your Bibles to the easiest book in the Bible to find, the very first one, the book of Genesis. Here's what we're going to do today. We're just going to look and see where was the first time this word of holiness is used in the Bible. It's actually going to unlock everything for us to see its very first uses. Genesis chapter 2 is where we're going to begin today. Now, oftentimes when we start to talk about defining biblical terms, we'll go into the scriptures and let that shape our understanding. That becomes the foundation of everything that we're going to do. So the rest of the series is really built on just some pretty basic rudimentary understandings of holiness. But if you could imagine, this word holiness, and we're going to unpack it here in just a second, is used nearly 1,000 times in your Old Testament. And it's used in different ways. It's translated different ways in different contexts, spoken by different people at different times for different purposes. There's a lot of usage, but we could actually analyze all of those passages and put it into just a couple categories. And actually, I would say there's one primary category, and everything else really is subordinate to that. When we step into Genesis chapter 2 and we look at the first time that it's used, we're stepping into that primary usage. It's going to help us to see everything. So come with me into Genesis chapter 2. Now, you know that if we're in Genesis chapter 2, what came before Genesis chapter 2? Genesis chapter 1, my friends, it's 31 verses. Do you know what's in Genesis chapter 1? It's the creation of the entire universe in 31 verses. You know what I mean? So just to do a little bit of contextual work to get into Genesis chapter 2, we have to talk for just a second about the entire creation of the universe in 2 minutes or less. Okay, so here's how we're going to do it. Just as a lead into chapter 2, man, the best way I have heard Genesis described and talked about actually comes from children's Bibles. And here's what I mean by that. If you've ever read through Genesis chapter 1, it's super dense, and you can often very easily miss the design pattern in Genesis 1, but children's Bibles pick up on the design pattern and actually communicate it really well. How is that? Why do they do that? Because they use pictures. Who doesn't love pictures in their Bibles? I totally do. So here's the 6 days of creation. Now, just as you look at it, do you see anything? Do you see a correlation between day 1 and day 4? And day 2 and day 5 and day 3 and day 6? Okay, that's actually revealing the design pattern in Genesis chapter 1, which is a mind-bending tapestry that is being woven by the creator of the universe to bring us into some really big ideas. We have a tendency to get focused on some of the, what I would say maybe some of the secondary issues like chronology and biology. Those things are super relevant and important. It's just not what Genesis 1 draws us into. Genesis 1 draws us into the character and the nature of God on display in the world and the universe that he creates. Now, it has nothing to do with our message today. I'm just saying Genesis 1 is all connected. Imagine the truth of God being folded in on itself, and in Genesis 1 you begin to unravel the pieces, and what you see is so brilliant. But it's just 6 days. This brings us right into Genesis chapter 2. So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them, it was completed. But there was a seventh day. And God finished his work on this day. He rested from it. Now, this is really important. I want to highlight this word rested in the Hebrew. So your Old Testament, dominantly written in Hebrew, so we can poke around on some of those Hebrew words and really get a deeper understanding of what we're being drawn into. So this word rest is the Hebrew word Shabbat. And that is, we're more familiar with that word in its English, which is the Sabbath. He Sabbathed from his work. Now, just real quickly, if we were to press on this word, we would see that Sabbath and rest is not wholly passive, that it's an active rest. And we'll unpack a little bit of that, but watch what comes next. So in the midst of this active Sabbath or this rest, God blesses the seventh day. Now, for those of you who've read through Genesis chapter 1, what does God say about those days after each one of them? He says those days are good. He says they're good, but what does he say about the seventh day? He says the seventh day is blessed, and God declares that it's holy. Now, that's really unique. God is doing something. This is the first time it's used in the Bible, and just from the context of this passage, it's drawing us into our understanding of this word holy. Now, why is it blessed? Why is it holy? Because that's the day when God Sabbathed from his work of creation. So let's just stop here for just a second. And let's imagine we had to try our very best to come up with a definition for this word just based on the context. Actually, we have all that we would need to define this word from a biblical perspective. First and foremost, holiness emanates, and finds its origin in God himself. That's going to be really critical for us as we move through this teaching series. Holiness, this overflow outpouring that comes from God, he declares that something is holy, but what does he mean by that? Well, just the days of creation are telling us it's something different. It's something separate. It's unique. It's set apart. And then we even get an understanding of why. Because it's fundamentally, in its created purpose, totally different. Okay, that's actually going to set the pace and the standard for everything we're going to do in this series. And we don't even have to push too hard on it. Now, I want to add a little bit of sort of the academic side of this, because when you look at this word in its original language, it's actually just 3 characters. The Hebrew language doesn't have any vowels, so it's just Q, it reads from right to left, Q, D, and S. And these little marks here, these are breathing marks, so that if you were reading Hebrew and you'd see the breathing marks, you would know where to place pauses and inflections. In modern English, you know what we use? We use vowels, because that totally makes sense to do. So here's what the word we would look at this as a translation into English, and very simply, it just means something that's set apart, something that's treated as special. It's unique. I'm taking this and I'm setting it over here for a purpose. Now remember, it's all emanating from God's character itself, and so there's some stuff we're going to unpack there. But all I really want us to do as we kick off this series, when we're talking about holiness, what are we talking about? Well, a biblical definition of holiness is to set something apart, because it's to be used, its purpose is special and unique, which is why this word is translated often as consecrate. So You could read throughout many portions in the Old Testament. You're not going to see the word holy. You're actually going to see this Hebrew word translated as consecrate or to sanctify, or even, and this is, I think, really relevant for where we are in our world, we would use the word dedicate. I'm going to dedicate something for a specific purpose or a specific reason. So all we've done here is we're talking about holiness. Where is it first used in the Bible? It's used in Genesis chapter 2. That gives us a really good definition. But even when we push on the grammar, we see, it just means to set apart. It's unique. And we're going to see this over and over and over and over and over again in your Bibles. Let me give you a couple of examples. That there are things that can be holy. And you can go in Exodus chapter 40. Things like utensils and bowls could be holy. Well, what do you mean by that? Like they're set apart. They're designed. Their purpose is to be used in a different way. We would say they're holy. But not just things, we also see that there are people that are designated as holy. So we see this a lot with the nation of Israel. They were to be separate from the other nations. They were to consecrate themselves at different times in different places for different reasons. They were to set themselves apart in all these different ways. Think about the dietary restrictions of the nation of Israel. Think about what that means. A lot of it is steeped in this idea of holiness. But not only people, we also see it in certain places. The second time that the word holiness is used is actually at a place. There's this guy by the name of Moses. I think, almost 4,000 years ago, there was this guy. He was raised in Egypt, and then some drama happens. He takes off. He ends up being a shepherd for the 40 years of his life. And one day as he's out tending his flocks, he sees something up on the hill of the side of this mountain, and it's like this thing's on fire, but it's not burning. It's like a weird fire. And he's super curious, so he gets as close as possible to it. He hears the voice of God emanating from it, saying to him, "Take off your shoes, man, because the ground that you're standing on is holy." Now, what does that mean? Holy. Well, we already know this. That means there was something unique, set apart, and different about that ground that he was standing on. Now, if we take that idea that holiness emanates from the character and nature of God, that's going to start to make a lot of sense. I'm just really saying holiness is used in a lot of different ways for a lot of different reasons, for a lot of different purposes, but it's got this main primary definition, which means to set apart. It's unique. It's treated as special. So with all of that, the first time that we saw it, we saw a special day. This day of creation isn't the only time we hear that. So let's kind of start packaging all this stuff together. Okay, so we're talking about the immeasurable quality of God. How are we doing that? We're doing a study of holiness, and we're doing a word study of holiness and how it's used in the Bible. And we went to the first place that it was used when it was talking about a special day. Is there anywhere else that day is referenced? Yes. Let's double click on Exodus 20 and see how this big idea of holiness in creation gets brought down to real, practical, everyday life. And this is actually going to be sort of the ground at which you and I are going to have a lot of things to apply as we think about, okay, so how does that translate into everyday life? How do we take this holiness idea and put it into practice in my daily life? So come with me to Exodus chapter 20, and we're just going to read through how God applies this language and this idea of holiness into everyday life. Exodus chapter 20. Now, if we're in Exodus 20, we've got 19 chapters. How are we going to do 19? Let's do 19 chapters in 2 minutes or less. You've got 2 million people enslaved in Egypt. Think about 4,000 years ago. And God delivers them miraculously through signs and wonders, his power on display. And he uses this servant by the name of Moses. We just heard about him. God uses Moses to lead these people up out of Egypt into what ultimately would be called the Promised Land. But in that process, in that journey, God brings them to a mountain known as Sinai. And as this huge tribe of people is there at the base of the mountain, God calls to them, and he invites them into a covenant, into a relationship contract. And he just asks them straight up, do you guys want to be my people? And the people responded, yeah, that sounds pretty good. And so God says, okay, well, here's the terms of our contract. Here are some things that are going to have to be in place in order for our relationship to be healthy, some healthy boundaries. We call it the law. And most of us probably have an understanding that there is a kind of top 10 in the law known as the 10 Commandments. And that's what Exodus 20 brings us right into. So as God is communicating to the nation of Israel, here's how we're going to be successful. He says, okay, here are some things. I am your rescuer. I'm your redeemer. I'm the one. I'm your salvation. And I love this. He starts off by saying, here's who I am. I am your redeemer. I'm your rescuer. So in order for this to work out, you can't have any other gods. That's not going to work well. And you're not going to be able to take those stones or those little wooden carvings, and you're going to have to stop bowing down to them like that means something. Those are idols. We've got to get you out of that way of thinking. Remember, they were coming out of the Egyptian land and they worshiped all kinds of gods down there. And then he says, and you have to be careful how you approach me. And I've gotten tripped up on this all morning long. You can't misuse, we would think of that term blasphemy. You can't misuse the name of the Lord your God. So God gives a top 10, and he includes how we talk about him. Now, I think one of the reasons why I'm getting tripped up on that all morning long is because how comfortable we are talking about God, and maybe we're missing out on some of the grandeur, the bigness, the splendor, the majesty. He's become pretty common and friendly. There's a danger inside of that you and I can learn from. But watch what he says next. In order for us to be tight, here's what I want you to do. I want you to remember, this is a constant sort of, always put this in front of you, an observance. You're going to set something aside, a time and a space for rest, for Sabbath. And you are going to, by doing that, you are going to keep it. And here's our word again, holy. That somehow in the mind and heart of God, what he did at creation was going to be reflected in what we do every week. Now think about that for a second. God took the creation of the universe and he's mirrored it like in your week. I have a hard time making sense of that. It's like standing on top of a mountain and you go, oh. It's like looking out over the ocean. You get a sense that there's something more. That we are somehow very, very small in comparison to what this God is inviting us into. And watch what he says next. You have 6 days out of the week. You can focus on all these other things. But this seventh day, from Friday evening to Saturday evening, that was their Sabbath. That was the beginning of their week. They were going to begin from rest. This Sabbath day was something that you would dedicate. You would set it aside as special. Now, in the created order, who did the dedicating and the setting apart? God did. In the commands to his people, the contractual obligation to that relationship contract, we had the responsibility of setting aside this day to the Lord. And don't do any work. Not anybody in your household. I don't care who it is. You, your kids, your employees, even your animals. I don't care if it's strangers. I mean, this has got to be built into the rhythm of your life. And guess what God draws everybody back to? Because that's how I've created everything. The universe was created with this as a part of its fabric, and your life should reflect it. This is a blessed day. to set apart as holy. This language is super common to us now because we've heard it. Oh, that's just the definition of holiness. And it's being brought from the creation down to my every week. Now, this is really fascinating. From this command to the next one, watch the transition. And also, you need to live out your love for me and live from a place of rest. That's going to come out in how you treat other people. Primarily, it's going to come out in your family. And I'm the giver of life. I can't have you taken life. And I'm a monogamous God, and I'm going to expect that in your relationships. I'm the God who gives. So you can't be a kind of people who steal and lie and long for things that you don't have, whether it's their possessions, their relationships, their servants, or their stuff. You got to stop scheming to get the things that you don't have because it's a bold declaration that you're not trusting in me. This is the Big 10. Now, did you notice something? We could actually take the big ideas and concepts in the Big 10 and divide them into two categories. Category 1 is our relationship to God. Category 2 is our relationship to everybody else. And you know what sits at the heart of those two things? Is Sabbath, is holiness. But what do you mean holiness, Brad? I mean something that you've set apart. Now this is where our sort of working definition of holiness gets us in trouble because we often associate holiness with moral purity. Now that's part of a definition. We're going to get into that later in the series, but the primary definition is setting something aside and treating it as special. To think that's at the heart of the 10 Commandments, oh, that's something. And I want to challenge everybody in the room. Does that remind you of any teaching of Jesus? Because there were some religious people of his day that came up to him and they said, hey, Jesus, what's your Big 10? Like, we've got the law of Moses. We know what God says, but what do you say? You know what he does? He goes, I'll summarize it in two ways. Your relationship to God and your relationship to everybody else. And at the center of that is me. Oh, now hold on a second. For my scholars in the room, my Bible friends who love to study throughout the week, let me encourage you to go into Matthew chapter 11. And at the end of Matthew chapter 11, Jesus says something so profound. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and who carry heavy burdens, and I will give you, what does he say? I will give you rest. Now, do you know what Matthew does next? Right after Jesus says that is Matthew chapter 12. Guess what Matthew chapter 12 talks about? Jesus going toe-to-toe with the religious leaders about the depth and the meaning of Sabbath. Okay, so hold on. Here's what we've done. We've talked about the grandeur and the awesome, the speechlessness of God. We brought that down a little bit through the discussion of holiness. We even got down to the word holiness and see how that was used. And then we saw how God brings that idea of holiness from the created order down into our everyday week. And that's where Jesus sits as our ultimate rest. That somehow through him we have an access to a holy God that had never been seen before. My friends, we are just now stepping in to the grandeur of something really big. Like in these moments in the text, we're being brought into something that I think we're just getting a glimpse of how deep and profound it is. Because I can stand on the shore with my toes in the sand and I can look out over the ocean and go, that's amazing. But humanity has only explored somewhere between 11 and 17% of the ocean. Okay, that's where we're at. to even consider these ideas. Now you're thinking, okay, so how, holiness, Sabbath, Jesus, what are you doing, man? Stay with me. You and I are no longer required to observe the Sabbath. We are invited to enjoy it. We're not under the law of Moses. We're under the law of Christ. It's totally different. And there's a big discussion inside of here. What part of the law of Moses in the Old Testament applies to our life today? I would actually say there's more to that discussion than anything we're talking about in this place. But here, let me say it to you like this. What God was showing humanity was his awesomeness and his grandeur and how it applied to our daily week. And how did they do it? They set something aside. Now, we're not required to do that. We get to do that. We're invited to do that. And this brings us right here. When was the last time you took time out of your day or your week to just stop and remember the majesty of the Creator? This brings me right back. This is just a story about a conversation I had with my 8-year-old son in the driveway when I was convicted that I had yet to turn my eyes towards heaven. The only goal and purpose of this entire sermon series is to get us to a place where we are refocusing our worship off of ourselves and onto the God who created us. This is something we get to enjoy. So how do we take all this stuff that we've talked about? Really, we've just defined holiness according to a biblical example, and we've seen how it practically applied to them, and we're asking the question, how do we go from kind of awe now into application? What does that look like practically? Because if you're like me, like getting into those moments, it's a little bit easier on mountaintops. It's a little bit easier when babies are born. Honey, please, I don't think we should have any more babies just to experience the grandeur of God. There's probably other ways to do it. Maybe we don't need to go to the ocean. Maybe we just need a moment to stop. Maybe we need to start creating some space in our days and the time that we've been given. So I'm going to challenge everybody in the room here. Where is this time and space for you? Is it every once in a while? Is it only when you go on vacation or you get to see something? Is it in the driveway on the way back from the mailbox? What is this space? What if God was inviting us into it every single week? Actually, I think he does. I don't necessarily call it a Sabbath. I call it the Sunday gathering. When you and I, what we get to do every week? We get to recenter everything around the truth and the beauty of who God is and who he calls us to be. We call that church. I mean, where else in your week do you gather with like-minded people and just center everything on the beauty of God? I think it's one of the most important rhythms that you and I can have in our week. But if this is the only place you're setting aside time and space, I'm going to challenge you to go a step further. What does it look like tonight? What does it look like tomorrow? And in those spaces, it's one thing to say, okay, create some time and space, but what do we do in those spaces? And this is where I'm just going to take a page from my own life. There's always things that I have got to let go of and things that I need to grab onto. And here's what I mean really specifically by that. Man, I get pretty caught up in what's going on in my life and what's going on with my kids and my wife and this ministry and the city and the world. And I get caught up in that noise. I get caught up in the worry. Just this past week, man, having a hard time sleeping, anxious about some things. And when I get anxious about things, you know what I don't do? I don't make time and space to just sit and think about the God that I'm praying to. Maybe that's exactly what I need to do. So I need to let go of some things. I'm like, I need to let go of that worry because that's going to be the place that I can start to trust. And maybe in those places, I need to start letting go of some of the control that I need, that I feel like is just so important because that's when I can start to depend. And suddenly, I can start to grab on to things like his word. You know, to bathe yourself in the Genesis narrative is to get a view of God that is, I think we're just desperate for, because it's his grandeur and it's his awesomeness as the one who spoke and created the universe. That's a big view of God that I'm desperate for on Tuesday afternoon. So we got to let go of some things and we need to grab on. What kind of things do we need to grab onto? I would encourage you to grab onto his word, not just during the Sunday gathering, but throughout the week. I would also encourage you to grab on to some prayers. And I mean real simple, basic prayers. I'll just bring you into my prayer space like, God, help me. I feel like I'm lost without you, and I don't know what to do. I'm not kidding. Like, that's what my prayer life sounds like. It's not super flowery. It's a little gritty. I get emotional when I start talking about it because when you think about who's listening to you, oh, that's super humbling. He knows who I am. Wait, hold on a second. Those moments we're tiptoeing into something big, and I didn't need a mountaintop to do it. I just needed to refocus. I needed to grab onto those kind of prayers that say, God, if you don't show up in some miraculous way, we're all going to be lost. I'm literally praying that before I come out on stage. God, we need you. Help us. Draw us into your word. God, show us what we need to see. Simple prayers. But I'm telling you what, they are like life preservers in the ocean of his holiness. And there is, my friend, where he will hold us in his hands, maybe in a way that your soul has been so thirsty for, and yet you've been trying to fill it with everything else. So real simple, practical takeaways. And it's actually what we're going to do just now in the middle of this service is we're just going to grab on to prayer. And then we're going to have an opportunity to sing praises to the one who right now dwells in an inapproachable light, who is beyond our ability to understand, who is beyond time and space. That God invites us in to think we get to offer anything to him is a divine privilege. And then you know what we're going to do? This blows my mind. Jesus, 2,000 years ago, gathered around a table with his disciples, and he said, every time you do this, I want you to remember that my body was broken for you. And you're going to hold it in your hands. And you're going to know that I love you. And every time you take this cup, remember, I gave it all for you. We get to do that together today. Is there anything more beautiful? And we get to do it together. So let's somehow, just for a second, just still our hearts and minds and pray to this awesome God. Our Father in heaven, will you help us? We feel like we're just tiptoeing into an understanding of you that we can't even grasp. I'm just asking, would you let your splendor and your brilliance somehow break through our stubbornness and our hard-heartedness. Give us a bigger view of who you are. And let that holiness that emanates from your character saturate our hearts and minds. We're desperate for more of you. And we're just going to confess. We've made a big deal about a lot of other stuff. And we've actually minimized your beauty. Forgive us for that. We're going to stand now on a promise that was made by your Son, Jesus. That in him, we can see you. And we don't understand the depth of that, but we are desperate to know you. So in some way, we're going to offer up now a song. Would you search our hearts and hear our broken, flawed, and feeble words, but accept them as a kind of gift that we want to give to you, just to say thank you. Thank you for who you are and who you invite us to be. Ah, that's so beautiful. If we sing your praises for the rest of our life, it won't be enough. So for now, hear our prayer for the sake of your Son, Jesus, who is worthy of all of it. As we pray this in his name. Amen.
Please stand with us as we continue to return to our worship to our Lord.
You're turning over tables and calling for return to our lives upon the altar, the things we did at first. You're clearing out the temple, you're cleaning out the dirt, for we are your territory, Lord, we are your church. We are your people, you are our God. We are your temple, make us holy like you are. You see a holy God, we need resurrender. So we resurrender. If you're calling, we're coming. We're not walking, we're running. God, we need resurrender. So we resurrender. If you're calling, we're coming. We're not walking, we're running. God, we need resurrender. So we resurrender. If you're calling, we're coming. Not walking, we're running. God, we need resurrender. So we resurrender. We resurrender. We are your people. You are our God. We are your temple. Make us holy like you are. We are your children. You set us apart. God, for your glory, make us holy. You're calling, we're coming. We're not walking, we're running. God, we need resurrender. Keep singing. We need resurrender. If you're calling, we're coming. We're not walking, we're running. God, we need resurrender. So we resurrender.
Amen. You guys can go and have a seat. And I think about those mountaintop moments in my life, those moments that kind of leave me speechless. And I think we've all had those moments to some degree or another. For me, it's like when the first time I saw the Grand Canyon, I just sat there speechless for a long time. And whether it be like Brad said, whether it be at the ocean or the mountains, like those moments leave us speechless because they remind us of how small we are in comparison to like the creation, right? But in like a spiritual sense, like when I was sitting around the Grand Canyon, I just realized like I am tiny. My life is fleeting. I'm very small. And it's super humbling to be in that moment, and that's what leaves us speechless. But on the flip side, like when we enter into this time of communion, it's beautiful because even though we are small in comparison to the holiness and the majesty of God, He chose to come down to this earth and be with little old me and little old you. And when we, in some ways, in some spiritual and amazing way, in this moment, like all the fullness of God's love and forgiveness and mercy is condensed into these things that we get to hold in our hands and we get to ingest. And it reminds us, it's like God's way of meeting us here on this earth, and reminds us that even though we are small compared to them and compared to Him, He like loves us richly and deeply and meaningfully, and desires a connection and a relationship with every single one of us. And that's why He came to this earth. And so in this moment, as we commune together, as we take the bread and the juice, let's just remember our place before our Creator. Let's also remember that because of His sacrifice, He has bridged that gap, and we get to step into His holiness and His character right now. So let's have communion together.
Let's stand again as we continue to worship the name of Jesus, the only name that's truly worthy of our praise. Rumors of the Son of Man, stories of a Savior, holiness with human hand, a treasure for the traitor. No ear has heard, no eye has seen the image of the Father until heaven came to live with me, a rescue like no other. You are worthy. You are worthy of your name. You are worthy. You are worthy of your name, Jesus. You did not speak, you made no sound. When you died for your accuser, and as your blood fell to the ground, oh, you redefined my future. And on that day that you arose, the darkness ran for cover. God of the universe who sent his son so that we could be called his children. And that changes everything. You know, if you're new or visiting with us here at Forum, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. We would love to answer any questions you might have or help you get connected to the deeper community. So if you have any questions about how to join a life group or men's ministries, women's ministries, couples ministries, whatever it is that you're looking for, we would love to answer those questions for you out at the starting point in the lobby. For those of you joining us online, feel free to ask those questions to your online host. Church, we love you. We hope you have a great week, and we'll see you soon.